Hey everyone, this will be my first video on the channel, and it's going to be about my experience of creating a game from scratch to a playable version, as well as starting an indie studio and assembling a team. But that'll be a topic for a separate video in the future. Just so you know, I've been preparing the materials for this video for about 3 months, and the content can be useful for beginners looking to get into game development, as well as people with some intermediate skills. I'll share how the idea for my game came to me, the challenges I faced, the pain and despair I experienced, and how I managed to rise again with renewed strength. I was quite apprehensive about deciding to monetize this video because I recorded over 200 hours. That's just the time when I had OBS on. In total, it took me much longer. Imagine I need to fit 200 hours of footage into 10-15 minutes, maybe 20. Let's see if I can pull this off or not. When I started working on the project, I had minimal experience with Unreal Engine, maybe just about 1 week. So I think you'll be able to notice how my skills improved throughout the creation of the project from start to pre-final version. During this time, I delved into Unreal Engine, Sequencer, Metahuman, Photoshop, Adobe Audition, Blender, figured out how to work with textures, lighting adjustments, and baking, learned the purpose of zones with more critical lighting, and reflection and reflection zones, also optimized the project, switched it to night, and then switched back. I explored some aspects of the Permission plugin that aids in level design. I also got acquainted with several neural networks, including those used for character voiceovers. I wrote brief documentation called a design document, and I am undoubtedly grateful to YouTube, which has a tremendous amount of information to help you learn how to work with anything. Yeah, since I recorded a lot of footage, a lot will need to be cut out. It's obviously impossible to edit minute by minute, so I decided to focus on the more interesting parts of the game development process and explain what's happening. One more thing, this is my 5th attempt to start on YouTube, and your like or comment can really help me continue doing this. I plan to run this channel about the game industry, level design, and game publishing on Steam, Epic, and share everything based on personal experience. Share everything from personal experience. The huge introduction is over. Let's get started. I stumbled upon a few levels, like escaping the draft board. These are non-AAA level games, so to speak, and decided to create something similar. The initial idea was a game about a drunk who wants to get to the store to buy a bottle of alcohol costing about 7 rubles and sell the game for the same price on Steam. Yes, the game was junky, that was clear from day one, and I started developing a more interesting storyline in my head. It's great that I came across Dmitry Fadeyev's video about creating real-world locations in the Unreal Engine 5 photorealistic environment. I'll leave a link to the video in the description. This guy is recreating a location from his childhood in the city of Kerch. Coincidentally, I also lived in the city of Kerch when I was a child. It was around the same time, several decades ago. Moreover, the location that Dmitry is creating is only a few blocks away from where I used to live. This inspired me, and I decided it would be a great setting for a game, just a small note for the future. The style of the environment in my project turned out to be quite somber, but it does not reflect the appearance of my old yard. I started gathering references, compared them with Google Maps, and collected many images of what apartments looked like back in the day. A real estate listing site helped me with this. Then I began searching online for ready-made models of houses. After a couple of hours of searching, I found an option that soon ended up in my cart, and I got started with designing in Unreal. An interesting way to find the right sizes is to take a screenshot of the real layout, overlay it with a plane, and then place objects on top, because 1 unit in Unreal is equal to 100 centimeters. This way you can easily find the right proportions for rooms, furniture, and other objects. It is quite simple to find the size of sofas, tables, and such things on a furniture store's website. After about 20 hours of a continuous marathon, this is the result I got. These were the first days. In the first few days I learned to work with materials and the built-in 3D editor in Unreal. But realizing how much I wanted to accomplish, I simply wouldn't have been able to get everything done since I initially planned to finish the game in 1 month. That was very reckless, and this realization led me to decide to buy a ready-made asset from the store. Spoiler alert, it was not the best decision, because I already encountered a bit of hate in the game development community. People were saying that everyone is tired of this asset, claiming there is no level design involved when you use a pre-made asset. But that's not true. I only take the models, and everything else I do is the design work itself. The fact that it ends up being 90% similar is not my fault. It's just that these apartment buildings are all made like carbon copies. Sometimes even some panel buildings in real life look like a level designer's mistake. For example, here's what I noticed. I had never seen before, or rather never paid attention, that panel buildings have these square protruding sections, and I never quite understood what their purpose is. Probably insulation areas, but I am not sure. You can write in the comments what they are for. Looks like insulation, but I am not sure. Next. Since this was my first project, jumping right in and spending money was a bit daunting, so I decided to reach out to the seller and ask for a discount. I would have had to spend money anyway, but maybe a bit less. To my surprise, the seller replied the very next morning and immediately offered a substantial discount. I could not resist such a generous gesture and ended up buying an additional asset. This is my justification for why such a style of environment will ultimately be used. After I downloaded the asset, I started organizing everything in the scene by groups to make it easier to work with later on. I packed each building and each type of item into separate groups, allowing me to look at the techniques the asset developer used, rather than creating everything from scratch on the map, as after this amount of time, I would definitely start everything from scratch with a blank map, rather than wasting time on this pointless structuring. This task took me 2 days. But on the upside, I completely sorted through all the materials and meshes available in the asset, and roughly figured out where everything could be used. By checking Google Maps and photos from that area, I began setting up the scene and placing the assets. Once again, I took this task too seriously. An example of this could be what I did with the pipes in the yard. The pipe is under insulation. I flew the camera into the pipe, adjusted everything millimeter by millimeter to ensure there were no gaps, so it would be physically impossible for the player to see this spot. But it seemed very important to me that the pipe, which theoretically could carry something, was intentional. Another example of my obsession. I was arranging a cable from the TV tower, and it seemed very important to me that the cable went directly from the roof into the house, so that it went from the mast to the roof and then straight into the apartment. The cable goes from the tower to the roof, from roof to roof, and then directly into the apartment. Yes? In level design, you need that kind of approach. Everything should be logically justified, but what I was doing was overly fanatic, and a waste of time in places where no one would ever see it. Next up was creating the main character, and I moved on to Metahuman. It's an absolutely amazing and entirely free system, but unfortunately, it's not very versatile yet. It's quite challenging to create a truly unique character, and they only have a few outfits available. Apparently, there are plugins that can directly transfer your face onto a Metahuman, but I have not gotten around to them yet. In my opinion, I managed to create a very charismatic character that is just perfect for this setting. And here's the big reveal, the plot twist. This character is based on a real person. Yes, he was my neighbor back in those days. He was a very strange guy whom everyone avoided. And this man loved telling all sorts of incredible stories about himself. That's why this idea was used as the basis for the plot. So, is the story of your neighbor or the drunk guy from the next building, whom you don't hear much about, but you often see him in stores or around the house. He's always in shabby clothes, has an unpleasant smell, but you never really think about what pain might be hiding behind that facade. And maybe you should try to help him in some way. Maybe just ask how he is doing. Maybe he just needs someone to talk to. In my case, I tried to convey my childhood impression of him. I imagined he was a secret agent, needing to hide what he really did, and told tall tales as a cover. Stories like being abducted by aliens or seeing mermaids at sea. Of course, this was just my imagination, and unfortunately, I know nothing about him. By the way, a little note for those of you who decide to play this game in the future when I release it on Steam. Alongside dozens of other Easter eggs that I'll be adding, there's going to be one just for you, tied to this story about the spaceship. The chances of spotting it are extremely low, but it would be fascinating to read in the comments if anyone manages to see it. It's also an Easter egg for Grand Theft Auto 5 and the hot dog guy. That's your hint. See you around. Next up, after exporting the character, one of the most challenging parts was retargeting animations. Without any experience, I thought I might abandon the idea. So, here's how it went. At the time of creating the character, there were no decent retargeting videos online. I was setting everything up blindfolded. I later turned to the official documentation, At one point, I just gave up. For several days, I was caught in a wild loop and then resumed my search for a solution. I eventually came up with a decent animation setup, even hinting at a separate third-person game mode that I have in mind. Still, I am unsure if it will make the final cut. Most likely not. And that's that. No way, right? A mode where you use a piece of a fence as a weapon and fight with it like a club. Just a note for those who know C# even at some level, like me, or any other programming language. You will understand blueprints intuitively. This is a really interesting topic, and I plan to make a separate video with lessons on blueprints, covering whole cycles or specific aspects. For example, I could talk about setting up this kind of control. If anyone is interested, let me know in the comments. Next up, a little about decals and textures. They're really easy to create, and I was surprised by their high prices historically, because anyone can make them with minimal knowledge of Photoshop. Just draw something without an alpha channel, and that's it. Your decal is ready. I use decals to create all kinds of Easter eggs, both complex and simple. Some of you might not get everything because I went a bit too far with them. For instance, there's an Easter egg for Marmok. Seems simple, but even my wife didn't catch it right away, and we often watch Marmok's videos, or the coffee can labeled 9th cup. Really, it's not even an Easter egg, but more of a personal cry for help, because on some days I was working on the project for over 20 hours. Does this deserve a like? I hope so. It's important for promoting in the YouTube algorithms, which seem to ignore me for some reason. The next stage is setting up the optimized scene. I spent a colossal amount of time on it. Just building the lighting for the main scene alone takes me about 4 hours, sometimes more. And this is considering that I have an RTX 3070 Ti and 16 GB of RAM. If I add a bit more RAM, I could reduce this time. But building the lighting is still incredibly time consuming. While I was figuring out how the lighting works, I had to rebuild the project countless times. I'm talking about the entire project, not just one scene that I'm currently discussing. The project consists of several different locations and levels, and the lighting needs to be built on each level separately. In conclusion, I will tell you a bit about my discovery of HorrorEngine. It is an add-on for the Unreal Engine that simplifies working with it. And without any coding or blueprint knowledge, you can make a game just by creating event chains or even conglomerates of events. But it is undesirable to just take it and plug it into your game in its original form, as it gives an incorrect associative perception to players who have already played another game using the HorrorEngine. That's why it's advisable to at least change the interface, textures and font in the assets. In some places, I even rewrote blueprints and expanded functionality. Maybe even the developers of HorrorEngine themselves didn't realize the potential of their engine or sub-engine. I managed to compress this video. It was tough, and I had to leave out many interesting parts. Thank you for watching until the end. Share your thoughts on the content and presentation. I would love to get some feedback. As I mentioned earlier, if this video does well, I'll create more content about personal experiences, guides and tutorials on Unreal or Unity. And I do have teaching experience. I taught students at my previous job when I was a doctor. Bye everyone.